Welcome, everyone, to Color Commentary. We are your popper commentators, Michael Petchik and Adrian Guarzales. How's it going?
Pretty good, actually, now that you mention it.
I can't complain either. Just been real busy, but, good stuff. Let's get upkeep stuff out of the way. So first off, I want to tell you about how this podcast is brought to you in part by Original Magic Art. They are a super cool website, and they have a store with a whole bunch of neat things in it. And they have art prints of magic art. They have playmats with magic art on it. They even have dice bags, tokens, and playmats with classic art from, the non-magic sphere. And they're getting new stuff in all the time. Josh was on the show a couple weeks ago, and he is always working to bring new and interesting things into the store. I've got the website open literally right now. They've already got art from Ixalan in their print shop. They're getting in all sorts of really neat playmats soon. One of the big ones is they've got Gaia's Cradle now. They also have the iconic Masters art of Cryptic Command up as a print. So they make really quality products. I stand by them as an actual product because I have purchased stuff from them and I think it's great. But if you are looking to buy something from them, you can use the coupon code Commontary, spelled as in our name and in all caps, and you will get 5% off, and we get a little bit of a kickback. So not only are you helping support the show, you're also getting yourself a tiny little steal of a deal. So check them out. Definitely some quality stuff. What do you have for us, Adrian?
Well, Mike, I'm glad you asked, because we're not only brought by Original Magic Art, we're also brought in part from viewers like you. To coin a phrase, wonder if anyone's ever used that before. We're also on Patreon. If you like us, you can throw us a few bucks. Be real cool. You don't have to, just be real cool if you did. colorcommentary.com/Patreon, or no, patreon.com/colorcommentary. It's one of those two. If you like, we'll have a link for you. We'll make it real easy. But if you like it, we won't say no. You get access to episodes a little early, or maybe if someone forgets to edit out the ending, you get it anyway. But sorry. But yeah, you should check it out. It's cool stuff.
Yeah, we definitely enjoy the support of anyone who can. So let's talk about the past week. And for change, I was the one who got to go out and play Magic, and you had to stay home. So I went to the pre-release, and I don't know. I don't care for this as a limited format. Maybe it's just sealed, and maybe I just kind of hate sealed, but I'm not a fan of this format. I don't know. Full disclaimer, I cracked a foil Vraska, so I'm not upset about my pre-release, but the gameplay left something to be desired in my mind. And I mean, I've seen plenty of pros today backing me up as saying this is one of the worst draft formats in the past 5 years, so I feel slightly vindicated, but I don't know, it's just not a great format. Have you had any chance to play with anything out of the set yet?
No.
I mean, that's the other kind of thing, is my hype has kind of died down because I've realized there's nothing I can play in Pauper in this set, really.
I have Prying Blade. What about Prying Blade? Everyone loves Prying Blade.
Prying Blade is the thing I'm the most excited for. I just need to fidget around with it. I've heard I've seen discussion on the topic, and I'm not fully convinced that there's a best shell figured out for it yet, but it is a Trinket Mage target, and you know me, I'm kind of a sucker for him. So
I mean, I totally get it.
Yeah. Also, I would like to give a shout out to the two gentlemen whose names I totally forgot, but who are fans of the podcast and were at this pre-release and introduced themselves as fans. That was cool. It was a little weird. I'm sorry. I'm a super awkward human being and probably made the situation weird for y'all, but I do really appreciate y'all listening to the show. Support from viewers like you is how we get by. But yeah, pre-release. It was interesting, but I'm not sure this format is quite for me. But let's get into our deck tech, and this was something you brought up, and it's not actually at all relevant in a strict sense to today's metagame. Why don't you go ahead and tell us what we've got today?
Well, for a long time, Mike and I have talked about doing decks that are no longer with us, aka decks with banned cards in them. And so for today, I thought I'd trot out the boogiest of all the boogeymen, containing no less than 2 banned cards. Actually, there are 2 banned. Are there more?
3.
Yeah, there are 3 banned cards in this deck. So that should just give you kind of an idea of how dominant it was and how overpowered it was and how we're actually very lucky to no longer have it in the format. It's a deck from 2013. It utterly dominated the meta it was a part of. You basically had to play it or you weren't going to win. It did not play Skull Clamp, but it did play Cloud of Fairies, banned, Temporal Fissure, banned, and Cloud Post. Yes, Cloud Post is the one that is banned. Also banned. This is Mono Blue Fissure Post, and it was it was a deck that people used to play, and it sucked to play. Imagine Capsize, but all the time. Imagine Upheaval, but only for your opponent.
Yeah, this is a deck running a Storm card at 5 mana that was absurdly dominant in its day. Because from what I've heard, back at that point, you had Post, Storm, Infect, and what else really?
Those were really the 3 most dominant decks. And it's really interesting where you see these decks were just considered too powerful. I mean, Cloud of Fairies was banned way after the other 2 cards were, and it was still in a super dominant deck. It works basically the same way that the Drake decks work, for those of you who are a little newer to the format, where you would generate infinite mana, essentially, and then you wouldn't actually kill your opponent on 1 turn. You would cast, I'm just going to go through the deck, and I think the pieces will fall into place a little. First off, let's talk about our creature base. We start off with 4 Cloud of Fairies. This is from a cycle of cards in Urza where you would untap lands after you played it. So it costs 1 and a blue for a 1/1 fairy with flying. When it enters the battlefield, untap up to 2 lands. And to top it all off, this card had cycling. This was just nuts in combo decks and in Delver, where they could reasonably play this on turn 2, untap their lands, and then have access to Counterspell or Spellstutter Sprite. In this deck, it's more to untap your Cloud Posts and Glimmer Posts.
And in this deck, it's just kind of playing a pure combo role and eventually chipping in for damage once you've locked your opponent out of actually playing Magic.
Right, and then we with a bunch of 1/1. So we have 4 copies of that card. It really makes the deck tick. We have 3 copies of Seagate Oracle. I wonder if in this day and age it would play Augur Bolas instead. Probably not, though, because this is the only creature 3-drop in the deck, so it's probably fine actually. Plus it combos with Ghostly Flicker, which we'll get to a little bit later. It's a 1/3 for 3. The card. You look at the top card of your library, or top 2. You put 1 in your hand, put 1 on the bottom. Just a great way to generate card advantage and be a speed bump for the aggro decks.
Yeah. This, it's still a pretty respectable card. I think Augur has now kind of taken over just because the difference between 2 and 3 in a format with cards like Burning Tree Emissary is much different than it was. And also the fact that you have kind of this combo control payload. Like this deck also gets to play just cheap tempo cards to make sure your opponent can't really solidify a position on the board. Seagate Oracle serves its role here.
Yeah, in a vacuum, I think the card is better than the other one. Up next, we have 3 copies of Mnemonic Wall. I feel like most people already know most of the cards in this deck, but this is a 5-drop, 0/4 defender. It's a wall. When there's a battlefield, you return a target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard to your hand. So this is how you help generate that infinite mana, because this plus Ghostly Flicker plus Cloud of Fairies plus Glimmer Post is basically an infinite loop of mana, where you're always able to net extra. So you're able to generate stupid amounts of mana stupidly quick, chain a bunch of spells together, and then kill your opponent, or basically upheaval your opponent with Temporal Fissure. Following that, we have 4 copies of Muldrifter, which is just insane in this deck. It's the 5-drop 2/2 when it comes into play. Draw 2 cards. You can evoke it for 2 and a blue. So really strong creature, was also played in the Drake deck, also gets flickered. Just very, very good for this style of deck. Muldrifter, I think, there's not a lot of decks that are running it now. I think Tron might, right?
Yeah, some of the Tron lists are still running it, but like Blue Red Fairies isn't, or Blue Red Delver isn't. I'm trying to think of anyone else who has played it in the past. You still see it show up in the Alchemy list just because it is an evasive threat and it does have draw 2 cards and it can fuel Delve in a pinch. But outside of that, it's not seeing the play it used to. It is still a very good card. It's just banking on being able to get to 5 mana is not as reliable as it once was.
Yeah. Following that, we've won Monster Crusher because when you got a bunch of mana and your opponent's not doing anything, an 8/8 beater that makes them sacrifice things is great.
Yeah. And also, if you can cheat this out fairly early, like I've got to imagine that's pretty decent in the mirror. But yeah, it's a finisher. It's a respectable, big old dumb brick of a creature.
Going into the spells, 4 copies preordained, scry 2, draw a card, pretty self-explanatory. 4 copies of Snap. Not only can you snap your opponent's creatures, you can also snap your own creatures, untap your lands, and then replay them. So great with Seagate Oracle, great with Muldrifter. Kind of okay with Mnemonic Wall if you want to get the snap back. I mean, I guess that is an infinite loop snap in Mnemonic Wall. Kind of.
Yeah, kind
no,
of.
it is.
If you have enough of the locusts, mana. Yeah.
Yeah. Then 3 copies of Ghostly Flicker, which is really what makes this deck work. You exile 2 target artifacts, creatures, or lands, then return them to the battlefield. So a bunch of value creatures to flicker, lands to flicker to untap them. Infinite combo with Mnemonic Wall. So just a really strong card, and still played to this day in decks that are doing this sort of thing. I think that this is sort of the granddaddy of the decks that want to abuse Ghostly Flicker. Do you think that's correct?
Yeah, and I do want to point something out, though. It does have like a slight non-bow synergy with Cloud Post on account of Cloud Post does come in tapped, but it does have a real neat synergy with Glimmer Post of being able to flicker something, flicker your Glimmer Post, and re-trigger that enters the battlefield, gain 1 life for each locus you control clause. So you can kind of stabilize a little bit if your opponent's really, really aggressive.
And then the payload, 3 copies of Temporal Fissure. And I'm going to read this one because I don't know if a lot of people know what it does if you weren't playing back then. It's a 5 mana card, sorcery. Return target permanent to its owner's hand, Storm.
Do you want to explain Storm for the folks at home who may not have played in other formats?
Storm is when you play the spell, you copy it for each spell played before it this turn. You may choose new targets for the copies. So if you play like 10 cards in a turn, you're able to return 11 permanent. 10 cards plus this, you're able to return 11 permanents back to your opponent's hand. So you'd basically upheaval. You'd play a bunch of spells, upheaval them, and then kill them with your army of 1/1s and 2/2s.
Yeah, this is as with every other Storm win con that actually just ends the game when you cast it. And while this one technically does not end the game when you cast it, it pretty much will. This is on the ban list, and for very good reasons. Storm is a silly mechanic that probably never should have seen print, and to this day is baffling that they ever brought it back for any reason, even as a gag in Future Sight. Or was it Future Sight? No, Time Spiral. Yeah. I don't know. I got strong opinions from a game design perspective on Storm. But
yeah, it's I mean, that's the card, but I mean, there are other pieces to this deck. There's 2 copies Compulsive that was used in the Drake deck as well. 2 in a blue. Target player draws 3 cards, and the player discards 2 cards unless he or she discards a land card. You can use it on yourself. You can actually also use it on your opponent to mill them out. Drake had that out too.
Can I just sidetrack for a little bit back to the topic of Ixalan? The card I'm the most bummed was at common. I've figured out what it is. It's Charter Course. Have you seen this one?
I mean, probably. What does it do?
1 in a blue for a sorcery. Draw 2 cards, then discard a card unless you attacked with a creature this turn. So I know that is definitely or almost definitely too good for Pauper. Seeing compulsive research though makes me a little bummed that we didn't get it. Just a bit.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, compulsive research is good enough for Pauper, right?
Yeah, compulsive research is a very, very good card that I kind of feel gets underplayed these days. But
yeah, it's a very strong card though. Draw 3.
Yeah.
That. We have artifacts, 4 copies, Prophetic Prism. We're a mono blue deck, but this does draw you a card, so it is good with Ghostly Flicker. You can flicker the Prophetic Prism to help you draw cards. Also, just straight up draws you a card, right? So, no biggie. But really, you don't. I mean, I think it's really good because it draws you the card. I don't think you really need it otherwise.
Yeah, when we get to the sideboard, there is one thing in there that it helps you cast, but apart from that, it really is there to draw cards.
I missed that. Then we have 4 copies of Expedition Map. This is to help us find the Cloud Posts and the Glimmer Posts. It's the 1-drop artifact where you sack it. We'll pay 2 sack, get a land. Pretty good. Lands. Speaking of, sorry, go ahead.
Oh no. Go ahead. Get through these lands. Get through this very simple mana base.
There's 21. There's 4 copies of Cloud Post. Like you said, enters the battlefield, tap it to add 1 mana to your mana pool for each locus on the battlefield. Cloud Post is a locus. There's another locus called Glimmer Post. When it enters the battlefield, you gain 1 life for each locus on the battlefield. So not just you control on the battlefield, so Insane to the Mirror. And then you tap to add 1 to your mana pool.
I never actually realized that these were symmetrical. I never realized they count both sides of the battlefield.
Interestingly, they're also worlds apart. Cloud Post is from the original Mirrodin block. Glimmer Post from the Scars block. So that's kind of interesting if you think about it.
It's this neat little callback that accidentally broke Pauper in half and is banned in Modern, if I remember correctly.
Yes, fuels a deck in Legacy.
Yeah,
couple decks, Trauma, actually. Why play Trauma? You can play Post.
Yeah.
12 islands, and then one remote isle, which is the cycling land from Urza Saga. Comes into play tapped, but you can cycle it for 2, so no biggie. Interesting that they're playing the remote isle over the other one that just cycles for you. I imagine 2 colorless might be easier to get in this deck, but I'm really not sure.
Yeah, I can definitely see openers here where you have like 1 blue source and several locuses and this, and you might want to kind of have the draw over an additional blue source, and you also don't want to crimp the only blue source you have. So I see where they're coming from with this. We've even seen this back in the early days of the podcast when Rugtron was still a thing. Rugtron would play the Urza's cycling lands because it was just easier to generate the colorless mana.
Then on the board we have 4 copies of Hydroblast.
You know what you love.
Without knowing what the meta looked like back then, some of these might be a little bit hard. I think I can guess some of them. I mean, I imagine there were red decks. Storm was a blue-red deck. 2 copies Mana War. That's what enters the battlefield. You return a creature to its owner's hand. That's a pretty sick tech with Ghostly Flicker. So, yeah. Then we have 3 copies of Dispel, probably for the mirror.
Yep.
1 copy, an extra copy Temporal Fissure. 2 copies Curfew, which I imagine was for Hexproof, or Infect, which was a deck then.
Yeah, this is. I swear I've seen this played in other formats. It's blue for an instant. Each player chooses a creature they control and returns it to its owner's hand. So it's kind of like it's a blue innocent blood, if you will. Like both players have to bounce something, but notably this does stop a lethal infect threat if they only have 1 thing on the board.
It also gets around hexproof, so that's good.
Yep.
Up next, 2 copies Serrated Arrows. Now, this has a really neat interaction with Ghostly Flicker, where you can, if you have the mana, you can just keep doing this. It's very annoying because it'll come back with all of its counters and untapped. Serrated Arrows is a 4 mana artifact. It has 3 arrowhead counters. You can tap it to remove an arrowhead counter to put a -1/-1 counter on a creature. When no arrowhead counters on it, you sack it. So.
Well, notably, at the beginning of your upkeep, and this is a triggered thing. So if there are no counters on this at the beginning of your upkeep and you have a flicker in hand, you can flicker it in response to the trigger.
Yeah. Then we have 2 copies of Fadeaway, which I actually think is an underplayed spell as well. 2 in a blue for a sorcery. For each creature, that creature's controller pays 1 or sacrifices a permanent. Pretty nice.
It's Tabernacle.
Yeah.
Kind of.
Basically. Tabernacle is no. The Abyss destroys. Is Tabernacle destroys too?
It might. I haven't played against lands recently enough to know. But no, this is not actually Tabernacle. It's a similar taxing effect, but this is a very, very strong card in some matchups.
Then we've got 2 copies of Fairy Macabre. It's most of its text is irrelevant. It's a creature that you can discard to exile up to 2 cards from graveyards. I imagine also very good in the mirror. And then we have 1 copy of Karavek's Torch to burn them out in case we need to. When it's on the stack, it spells at target, costs 2 more to cast, so it's much harder to counter, and it deals X damage to target creature or player. So it is actually a pretty popular finisher in other big mana decks, most specifically combo decks like Familiars. It was good in Familiars. I think people played Rolling Thunder in Drake. Rolling Thunder has the benefit of being also a board wipe when you want it to.
Yeah, but with a deck like Familiars that is fat, or a deck like Fissure Post that is so lightning fast, I think you really care about the fact that you're able to cast it a little bit quicker. You don't have to hit that double red. And also, you're more likely to just be doing this for lethal.
Right. So that's the deck. Popper was a thing 4 years ago.
Yeah, this is a real doozy of a deck. And I mean, what is there to say? Like, this was worse for the format than Drake was, and Drake drove people away from this format. So I don't know. It's kind of weird to look back on this, just seeing like where the format was 4 years ago, almost to the day actually, from this particular list. But
yeah, October 1st. Wow. Yeah, the meta has changed a lot, and I'm glad that this is the kind of deck this is like a legacy power level deck in a format of like modern. Like that's the analysis I'll make. Sure, Popper is strong, and there are probably counters to this, but it was really just too powerful, and it was too ubiquitous with the format, and blah blah blah. So here we are.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just kind of wild to me to look at this and go, huh. So this is like 2 years after Delver of Secrets has been a card, and this deck just kind of completely crowded it out. Also, I do have to laugh because we've got the deck list here on Goldfish, and I don't know if you've looked in the sidebar at the daily results, but goodness. There's like entire dailies where everything is just like, there's like 10 mono blue Fissure Post lists. But I'm looking and, I see like there's blue Fissure Post, there's blue red Fissure Post that gets to play, or blue red Post, excuse me, which is just like Tron on steroids because it's just playing the posts instead of the Tron lands.
You see some other decks here. Delver is here. Stompy is here. Affinity is here. What is blue black Trinket, I wonder?
I have a feeling I know.
No, it's just what you thought it was. It's just playing Fissure Post. No, it's not really. That was a joke.
But
I mean, look at the creatures this is playing. It's playing 4 Augur Skulls, probably to help kill Fissure Post decks. 4 Duresses in the board, a Distress in the board because 4 Duresses was not enough.
Yeah, it's very telling when you kind of look at this and you see what other decks were doing, and you're looking at like a lot of very like Elves is here, and that's like a distinctly non-interactive deck, because the last thing you want to do when going against like a very strong combo deck is try and something of this caliber that is this resilient, because you can't just go, oh well, I'll keep a counterspell. That's not how Storm works in the least. We don't have Mindbreak Trap. We don't have Flusterstorm. Like, you just want to do your own thing and do it a turn quicker than they can.
Dude, so the Spreading Seas is in the sideboard of the Affinity deck, and then the Boggles deck is playing something called Lush Growth. Enchanted land is a mountain, forest, and plains. I imagine that takes away the post, right? That gets on post, doesn't it?
I believe that is the same wording as, yeah, it doesn't say in addition to its other types. Yeah, this just turns something into a tri-land, but it does.
This is interesting too. Sorry, go ahead.
It does exactly what you think it does. It does stop a post from producing more than one mana.
I want you to click on this deck called Wee Xerox, which was apparently the name of Delver Fiend back in the day.
Oh,
because there's a lot of people playing it under that name, which is really interesting.
I'm imagining because at some point before the release of Nivix Cyclops, this deck probably ran Wee Dragonauts, if I had to guess.
Yeah.
But I'm looking at it and, yep, this actually looks remarkably similar to where it is today, except it's got Delver instead of Augur. Although the act of treason is somewhat suspicious.
Yeah. All right, we can this a meta game of times past. But if you look at the top cards from this daily, they're all blue except for Expedition Map and Rancor.
Yep, and the Expedition Map is just being used by a blue deck as a way to make sure it can get that absurd colorless land that they printed for some reason.
Yeah. Wow.
But
intriguing.
you wanted to segue this into a larger topic, right?
Right, which is mostly there were two angles I wanted to approach. The first is, why do decks get banned? And the second is, the format's actually pretty dang healthy.
Yeah, so obviously, we've mentioned it already. Most fresh in people's mind is Blue Red Drake, which when it was in the format, I think it peaked at almost 30% of the metagame, which is absurd for an Eternal format. I can't think of any other format where it's like that heavily tilted towards one particular deck. And I'm willing to bet that most of these mono blue fissure posts are pretty close to 75 for 75. Like, I can't imagine that there's a whole lot of wiggle room here on exact deck construction. So
yeah,
I don't know. I think that's definitely one of the things that to me points towards an unhealthy metagame is when, especially in formats with large card pools, you start to see not just a best deck emerge, but a best deck that barely varies because it doesn't need to, because it's just doing its thing so effectively that there's this 75 that just works. And like, I'm not going to lie, I do love this format, but God, did I play a lot less of this format and enjoy it a lot less when Blue Red Drake was in the metagame. And in paper, we didn't even really have that many players who were playing Blue Red Drake in our local metagame. So the reason cards get banned in Pauper is because they have completely just wrecked the format most of the time. I don't know. I think, one of the things that people tend to forget about Pauper is while individual cards can have a high power ceiling, the amount of effect most cards have on the board in Pauper is fairly minimal. Like how many 2-for-1s are there in this format?
There's a couple. I'll think of one eventually. Firebolt. There you go. I thought of one.
Yeah, like it's stuff like Firebolt that's 6 mana versus like other formats where you get like Modern and Legacy get Supreme Will, which is an uncounterable wrath effect for 4.
Right.
So right. I think one of the big things is we lack answers to certain things that makes the format inherently weaker to a specific type of usually combo deck. Because if you look at the ban list, like there's nothing on that ban list that isn't a ban targeted to stop a very specific combo from going off. So I think if you want to point to something, I think it's the fact that we don't have any really good answers to non-interactive combo decks.
Right. The stack is where Pauper falters. And if you look at a format like Legacy or Vintage, which I'll go to Vintage, you get Flusterstorm, Force of Will. Force of Will, granted, is card disadvantage, but at least you can stop stuff while still tapping out. And then Flusterstorm is just like I feel like most of the time I see Flusterstorm being used against like one card. But if they tap out and you Flusterstorm, then you can answer all their storm spells, right? So
yeah. And I'm looking here on Goldfish again. The Legacy metagame right now, the breakdown from the past month or so, out of the top 12 decks, a grand total of 2 of them are dedicated combo decks, and 1 has a combo finisher that it can make use of. Like out of a format where like Tendrils of Agony is illegal, like Ad Nauseum is legal. You've got Lotus Petal and like Lion's Eye Diamond. Like there's some very, very powerful magic available in Legacy, and it's all kind of kept in check by having equally powerful answers.
Right. And then in Pauper, we can answer creatures pretty well by and large, but we cannot answer the stack very well.
Yeah. I mean, Pauper obviously falters against certain types of threats. Pauper has a harder time dealing with threats that go wide. For example, every time you play against Stumpy, there's always that risk that they just go turn 2, Burning Tree, Burning Tree, Burning Tree, Burning Tree. And there aren't a lot of decks that have a convenient way of answering that. But outside of like that one specific example, it's not like, we're not getting like Mere Battle Sphere or like Worm Coil Engine. Like the closest we get to Worm Coil Engine is stuff like Doom Dissenter, a 1/1 that replaces itself with a 2/2. Like,
right.
We're talking a very, very different sort of thing here, and I think at the end of the day, it's just like combo decks in Pauper are either not good enough to see play by and large because they're a little too rickety and they don't quite have enough pieces to work, or they're just absurdly good and distort the meta around them because there isn't a solid answer to them. Like that was the thing about the Drake deck was, unlike Familiars, you just could play mid-range blue-red out of that deck and be totally fine. Like,
yeah, you could just play Drake, play Muldrifter, Sago. You were already so far ahead.
And you played Modern when Twin was the thing, right?
Yes.
Like Twin kind of fulfilled that same role from what I understand of like the combo deck that could just play mid-range.
And Modern was also a format that has issues dealing with decks like that because, again, we don't have Force of Will and we don't have Flusterstorm, so you have to sort of interact with a combo after it's already happening.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, you can always leave mana up for countering your opponent's Splinter Twin, but the issue was the best blue deck was the one playing Splinter Twin. So
right.
I don't know, and I think specifically the fact that a lot of our non-creature only combo decks, so I'm specifically talking about not elves, most of them are blue, and that does mean that in addition to playing the combo role, you're also in the color with the most answers to fighting on the stack about stuff. Like, it would be one thing if this deck was, say, mono black and you tried to resolve Black Cloud of Fairies and your opponent goes counterspell and you go, oh, okay, I guess that's not happening. Whereas here, you have access to those counterspells and at no cost. Like, this is a mono blue deck. It runs 8 lands that don't produce blue mana. Like, you get to run those things pretty much for free. So I think as much as I hate to say this, blue's just kind of too good to get combo.
Yeah, I mean, the other combo deck we have is Ralligond, which can protect itself. It can protect itself. It just doesn't protect itself on the stack. It's a creature-based combo.
Yeah, and that is like an important detail to make here. Like, elves can lose to a control deck just because it does commit to the board. It doesn't have very many ways to interact on the stack, and if you have cards that line up well against it and also play well and know what parts of the combo you need to disrupt, that is a very, very winnable matchup from a control point of view. Whereas the control decks in the days of Drake, which, you know, is the one that I lived through from start to finish, like teachings and even like blue black angler were not like blue black angler was putting up some results, but teachings just kind of vanished and never really returned after that in a meaningful way, because, you know, you were playing against this deck that was playing a huge chunk of counter magic after the board got access to Pyroblast to fight you even more efficiently, and could also just play a creature game once. Like even if you disrupted key combo pieces, you still had to deal with the fact that they had threats, and you by and large did not have a whole ton of threats.
Right. Crazy town.
Yeah, it was a not a great time for Pauper. But so out of the rest of the banned cards, well, there's only one of them that has ever been banned without being formally played in the Pauper format, and that's cranial plating.
Yeah, I don't think they even let cranial plating be a thing, which is good.
Yes. You've played Affinity for years.
This is a good.
Yeah. Like man, the last thing I would ever want is to see that across the table for me, because that just means instead of playing ATOG, you just get to play 4 cranial platings and make everything into an ATOG. And if it dies, you make the next thing into an ATOG. Like that is some powerful magic right there, because that's got to be one of the better cards. You've been playing more Modern again. Like that's got to be one of the best cards in Modern Affinity.
It is the best card in Modern Affinity, I think. But there's a reason. There's a reason that the artifact lands are banned in Modern. It's not just cranial plating. It's also cards like Arcbound Ravager. And there's a reason that cranial plating is banned in Pauper, because it's easier to just ban that than ban the artifact lands, which would, I firmly believe, destroy Affinity as an archetype in our format, because then it loses the best thing about it in our format without gaining any of the benefits, because all the good cards in Affinity other than cranial plating, which obviously I'm excluding here, but like most of the core pieces of that deck are rare in Modern.
Yeah. So looking at the ban list, is there anything that you think could safely come off of the ban list? Like, have we gone far enough that, you know, some of these old cards might be okay to have back?
You know, I was thinking earlier when we were talking about Storm, and this is purely because I feel like I should choose something here. Do you think Empty the Warrens is too good?
Okay, here's the thing. So Empty and Grapeshot are both on the list, right? And Empty does make 2 goblins per copy, and Grapeshot does 1. Like Grapeshot, less decks can interact with, because what do you do in a
what stack? Well, yeah. But with Empty, you have a turn to answer the goblins and Electrickery, and that other 1 mana just deal 1 damage to everything in red is also a card. So I feel like answers have been printed at this point for Empty the Warrens.
I'm still reluctant to say yes, just because I am envisioning something that also gets to run, what is it, Thermo Alchemist or Firebrand Archer, or both.
But for Empty the Warrens, you don't cast the spell.
You don't cast the copies, yes. But I'm just saying, like, instead of having to go, okay, I need to storm to 10 so I can get exactly lethal, you'd be able to kind of set up this turn where you've already got a Firebrand Archer in play, and you storm for 7 instead, and you wind up with 7 ping triggers and 14 goblins. So instead of having to like sculpt out this very specific turn that can occur, you can just kind of go, okay, there's one less level of difficulty to me finishing this combo off. That said, I see where you're coming from on this.
I just think it's the easiest to answer card on this list. I think it's the least powerful card on this list.
Now, let me ask you something. Obviously, I think it's too good, but I'd argue that with the banning of Cloud of Fairies alongside Drake, I'm like,
Want to take Cloud Post off, Mike? That's what it sounds like you're going to say to me right now.
It does certainly sound like I'm going to say that. I understand fully like the issues with it, like compared to the Tron lands. Like if the Tron lands could get away, like full set of Tron lands represents 28 mana. Full set of posts represents 36.
At that point, though, it largely doesn't matter. I think it's just easier to assemble the posts than it is to assemble Tron.
And also when it comes to deck building, like you're looking at a much smaller footprint. Like one of the things about Tron is it still has to run cards like Prophetic Prism, not only for the draw, but the fact that 9 of your lands are guaranteed colorless, or sorry, 12 of your lands are guaranteed colorless. Getting 4 more colored sources into the deck is very, very powerful. So yeah, Cloud Post, I don't want to say like it would be healthy, but it's no longer combo bait. It's just absurd ramp out of something. Now, let me hit you with this. What if we got Cloud Post back in and got rid of Glimmer Post?
The life gain one?
Yeah.
I think the big mana one is more the problem. I see what you're saying though. You only have the big mana one. You don't have the utility of the life gain. I don't know. That's interesting.
Well, more importantly, it would cut your maximum mana production off your cheating lands, if you will, down to a grand total of 16. And while I'm not saying that's fair, I'm kind of curious as to how those, like how a Tron style deck would play like that. And obviously, you know, it does free up even more space for colored sources, but it does also price you into probably running 3, if not 4 expedition maps. So I know, for example, in Peasant, the fringe French format, they actually, I think last year, banned Glimmer Post instead of Cloud Post. And the format decided that Tron was actually just the better way to go because it was more consistent without having to run these tutor effects. You could just run the Tron lands and naturally luck into Tron. So yeah, it's
you luck sack.
It's just interesting to talk about because I do think every single card on this list should stay banned. Like, I'm not gonna beat around the bush on this. Every single card on this list is there for a very good reason, and unbanning any of these would instantly destabilize the format to a point that I don't want to be here for. Like no one wants Invigorate unbanned. Like that is a silly thing to even posit. But
I'll supposit you.
So
that was a stretch.
It was, but I'll allow it. I don't know, like just looking down this list, Cloud of Fairies was part of multiple degenerate combo decks. Cloud Post was part of a degenerate combo deck and a goofy ramp deck. Cranial Plating never got to see the light of day, but from what I've heard, when Pauper was not a sanctioned format, it was a real problem. Empty the Warrens and Grape Shot, both of which are storm payloads, totally deserve to get banned. Frantic Search, the 3 blue, 2 and a blue, draw 2, discard 2, untap 3 lands. Yes. Keep things that let people dig into goofy combos banned. I mean, Modern can't even exist with Preordain and Ponder without Storm becoming dominant. Like
banned.
Actually, I've got to wonder. I've heard that Opt is making Storm real good in Modern. Can you confirm?
So one more time. Sorry.
Opt, which is now Modern legal, has apparently been making waves in Storm and Modern as a whole.
Oh, gotcha. I have not actually been playing as much Modern as you think I have.
You've been playing more Modern than me, man.
I really don't know. That's not a good question for me.
All right, fair enough.
I want to call a friend.
Oh, and of course, how could we forget the first banning that happened while I was playing Pauper? Treasure Cruise. Rest in peace, our terrible ancestral recall friend. God, I'm not going to say that was worse than Drake because there was like a diversity of decks, But God, it was a diversity of decks that just got to play Treasure Cruise.
Yeah.
Like,
Treasure Cruise is so strong. I mean, you could just not be blue and play Treasure Cruise. That's how good it was.
I mean, God, I remember there were games where I was playing against Tron and they were just in such a dominant position where they just hard cast the darn thing. They were just like, why?
Yeah.
Why even bother?
Delve is a very strong mechanic, and putting it on Ancestral Recall was a bad idea.
Yeah, and this is kind of a walkthrough of different ways Wizards of the Coast has managed to underestimate the power of mechanics in constructed formats. Because Storm is obviously, for those people who have ever read Mark Rosewater's updates, he has something internally that he refers to as the Storm scale. And it's a 1 to 10 sliding scale, with 1 being evergreen mechanics, your first strikes, tramples, and flyings of the world, and 10 being Storm, the stuff that they can't reprint outside of supplemental products. And even then it's kind of dodgy. And the fact that this scale is named after Storm should just tell you something.
Free spells are good, I hear.
Yeah. Turns out when they're actually better than free in the case of Cloud of Fairies, it's a little rough. Now, I do want to touch on this real briefly. Is there anything you think needs to be banned in Pauper?
Gorilla Shaman. No, just kidding. No, I think the format is fine. The format is better than it has been in a very, very long time. I know some people don't think that you should be able to play Burning Tree Emissary, but I think they're wrong.
Yeah, I think right now the format is in a very good place. Just quick glance over at results, like Stompy makes up about 15% of the metagame. Koldatha Boros makes up 12% of the metagame. Is it Delver 10% of the metagame? Like, this is a stabilized format where there are certain decks that do well on a routine basis, but none of them is running away with the metagame. It's not, like we're not even grazing 20% of the metagame. We're sitting at 15 at the top, and then like just looking at this first page of deck lists, it represents a fairly wide gamut. Like, is it wide open enough to play mono white? No, not really. But
but I mean, like, some decks are just always going to be bad, and I don't mean like mono white is like the worst deck ever. Don't ever play it. Like, sure, people play it. It's okay. It's fun. It's not tier 1, but we're in a meta where like meta games will always have best decks. So it's really just like, how oppressive are they to the rest of the format? Like, are you seeing 10 in a daily event? Like, and then I think there's also this sort of untangential factor of just, what are people having fun with? And I know that there are some people who will be like, well, I have fun playing Fissure Post. But the thing is, Fissure Post is very one-sided. And that's sort of what Wizards tends to shy away from, definitely in like modern era Magic,
Yeah, like fundamentally, like a lot of these decks, like, is Stompy very good? Yes. Can you interact with Stompy and play a meaningful game of Magic? Sure. Like, you can interact with their creatures. This isn't, it's not it's not your opponent goldfishing while you sit there losing.
And I think that might be really the key. And I think that's why it might take them longer to ban creature-based decks sometimes.
Yeah, because fundamentally, versus like, there's one color that gets to counter stuff, and there's a second color that very, very rarely gets conditional counters or soft counters. Like, playing against other spell-based combos is very difficult for a lot of decks, whereas playing against creature-based decks, even if they're combo-centric, is much easier, because like, black gets answers to creatures, red gets answers to creatures, blue gets bounce, white gets, in Pauper, it gets worse removal, but it does get removal, and even green gets fight as like a mechanic. So there's no color that can't deal with them. And while like black can't deal with enchantments, and that's a bummer, there aren't really any enchantment based combos that are exactly tearing up the format at the moment. So I think
what about Boggles?
I mean,
That
there's
was a joke.
Boggles, but my guy, Edict
What about
effects.
Boggles? Well, Boggles. I'm really giving you a hard time.
I know.
I agree with you.
But you know, I think that while personally, as someone who enjoys playing mid-range and control decks, this format is slowly shifting away from those to a more aggressive slant. And that kind of coincides with the whole WotC New World Order design concept, where we're more creature centric than we were in the past. I actually think the format is healthier than it was before Drake. Like, I think we keep getting new and interesting cards in the format, and I think that the bans have helped us. You know, I think I said this right after Drake, a while after Drake got banned, but it kind of did burn down the forest, and now we've got new growth. Like, we've got new decks that are like, Is It Delver was not really a thing for years. I know that there was a period where Blue Red Delver was a thing, but like this particular incarnation of it wasn't a thing, and now it is, as a response to Stompy getting better. I don't know. I think the format is good.
Yeah, we're in a really good spot. That's really all we're trying to say here. I'd be down to do another banned deck again, though.
Yeah, I mean, we've got a handful of them to pick from, so we can talk about them. I mean, I think at some point it might be a good idea to bring up familiars, because that was also the bane of the format. Although I have to admit, I never felt like that deck was that oppressive.
Well, LSV once played that deck on stream, and he said, "Wow, it's like I'm playing a totally different format."
It was good. Don't get me wrong. Like, I'm not going to try and pretend it wasn't good, but I don't remember it being like one of those unwinnable matchups that just felt like, unless my hand lines up perfectly with theirs, I'm just done here. I don't know. Maybe this is fully rose tinted nostalgia glasses, but I don't remember it being that bad.
It was pretty bad.
I mean, I remember being much less a fan of turn 1 Delver, turn 2 blind flip Delver, Cloud of Fairies, go. That was the reason I wanted Cloud of Fairies banned.
We'll have opinions, Mike.
True.
I mean, no, you're right. That was also a reason. I mean, that was also definitely a reason it got banned. Just not just because it was a combo piece, but also just because it was huge value engine.
Yeah.
I mean, you know what I mean? I use that term a little loosely, but you know,
again, if it hadn't been blue and also hadn't coincidentally had the fairy subtype, I think it could have survived a ban for a little bit longer, just because
it would have been a lot worse.
It wouldn't have fit into Delver as well, and it wouldn't have had that built-in synergy with Spell Stutter Sprite, which, why did they do that? But I mean, obviously they didn't know they were going to print that years later, but
yeah, Urza's was a fair block.
It was. You got to play two types of decks, blue decks and plow under decks.
Did you know Urza's was an enchantment block?
Yeah.
That's crazy to me.
I mean, they printed an almost rest in peace at uncommon.
Yeah, they printed Sarah Sanctum.
Yeah,
that carries about a shape. That was just a cycle. What are the other ones in that cycle do? I actually don't know. Like, obviously we know Tolarian Academy, Sarah Sanctum, Gaia's Cradle, but what did the black and the red ones do?
So the black one of the Urza's lands is Phyrexian Tower, which is played in Legacy. I played in Nickfit. It's colorless, taps for colorless, or it taps and sacks a creature for 2 black. And then the red one is particularly terrible. It is the healing solve of this cycle. It is Shivan Gorge, which is a legendary land. Tap, add a colorless to your mana pool. 2 and tap, Shivan Gorge deals 1 damage to each opponent.
Dude, these are they're not even on the same level. Like 3 of them tap for mana equal to like other things, and then these are just bad. Yeah,
like Phyrexian Tower only sees play in a deck that wants to be sacrificing creatures for value because it lets you have an uncounterable way to do that. And like Shivan Gorge is bad. Like Shivan Gorge is under $1. And like Tolarian Academy, you can't even play anywhere but Vintage and is still like $40, I want to say. Like, that's absurd. But all right, I think we've ranted and rambled long enough. So you want to take us out of this show, Adrian?
Thanks for joining us today. This podcast is brought to you by the support of our Patreons. Please consider supporting us if you like the show. Check below this video, the description of this podcast for details on where to find us. We'd like to remind you that if you're listening to this on a platform with reviews, they're always appreciated because they boost our visibility. If you've got a deck list or an idea for a topic, feel free to contact us either via our website or by emailing us directly at colorcommentary@gmail.com. Special thanks to Pat's Games and L. Till next week, this is Adrian and Mike, and we are signing off for Color Commentary.